I was intrigued by Luis' testimonials about Mestre Batista, one of his greatest musical references. And we found on YouTube an 8-part series entitled Cavalo Marinho de Mestre Batista, filmed in 1991 by ethnomusicologist John Murphy in Pernambuco while he was doing his PhD at Columbia University. In recent years, the ethnomusicologist digitized and made his research material available online. And his collection includes 50 hours of audio recordings, 60 hours of video, and dozens of photographs and a Rebecca. Murphy left us 1 year ago. I learned that yesterday from Professor Sal. I didn't know that. I met him, I asked him to use his material. He was very happy that they would have a second life. The videos were very beautiful and they presented the same characters I had filmed, but 15 years before me. And the first rehearsals of Cine Rebecca were made only with my images from 2000s, because I had not yet found Murphy's collection. And when his collection became part of the Cine concert, another field was activated when kind of more distant and forgotten, and at the same time intensely present. The encounter of the images from John Murphy's research kind of revealed other textures in my material, and kind of brought light to elements which were invisible to me back then. So I was with this question: how would the encounter between these images produce a new image under the gaze of Luis Paixão, under the gaze of Luis Renata? How would that all affect them? The passage of time. So this is a bit of also left us 1 year ago, and Renata Rosa says that his musical performance was transformed when he started to interact with the images of the 90s. Perhaps upon seeing his old companions, Luis experimented an infusion of vitality, of belonging. His joy and surprise at discovering his past on the big screen produced a new creative impulse. During rehearsals, Renata noticed that he was putting himself more firmly in his opinions and musical ideas, as if the images were reminding him of the musical relevance of his trajectory and awakening a sense of empowerment. And when they merged, Murphy's research footage, and the raw material for what would be my ethnographic short film became a third thing, which was not the initial destination that we had both imagined. The audiovisual records produced in the Zona da Mata of the 90s were not made to become a film. They were made for John Murphy to later analyze the musical performance. And the audiovisual material I had produced was not intended to be shown together with the musicians at stage. So together our materials recreated themselves, always under the gaze of the Rebeca, which remained as a connecting thread between the collections. And Luis, music brought him close to Renata and to Murphy. It was also through his Rebeca that I connected with them. So Cine Rebeca was an experience that gave ethnographic collections a new life. Its layers also guided the analytical paths of my PhD thesis, in which I reflect upon the relationship between life transformed into images and its ontological materiality. In each tape, the fear that they'll break, because they're already weakened and dry. At times, the camera breaks, the tapes are dirty, they have some mold on them, which passes to the camera, which refuses to continue working. So we clean the camera, hopeful to continue the digitization process. And when I watch the digitized images, what was missing lives again for a brief moment. And then taking back archives and transforming heritage are ways to continue producing memories and meanings. And when reviewed by anthropologists, artists, members of the recorded communities or researchers, archives provides routes to problematize relationships within present times and past, complex pasts, and tools also to project new futures. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Let's open for some questions.
Wow, what a marvelous work. I actually don't have any question, but I think that for me the relevance of this continuous work, taking the hand of the last of the researchers behind us, and then go on working with the musicians, and you bring to this universe such a poetry, such emotional dimension that I think that is relevant once sometimes in the field we as researchers dry the relations with our position, very objective, and so you bring such a poetry to this that I think that it must be a wonderful field work. It's just a comment.
It was. Thank you, Nazario. Yeah, it was. Yeah, became really good friends. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. It's marvelous work, so thanks for sharing that. And I was wondering, because sometimes projects like this, they spark the interest within the communities to start recording themselves or putting up a community archive on these things. Did anything like this happen, especially now that like Louis died and maybe he has pupils, or I don't know, so did something like this happen, or is it like relying on people from the outside to do things like that?
Yeah, that's interesting because like in the early 2000s or at John Murphy's time, like people didn't have phones, so they were not videotaped. So these images were really like, wow, nowadays everyone's filming, right? But now that Luis died, what Renata wants to do is she wants to invite a pupil to be on stage with her, and not replacing him, he's not replaceable, but really showing this continuity. So that's the next stage of this project. So it's really fascinating how it's kind of endless. It can be like always recreating itself, right? So now that's the aim. Like, so she will be with a young kid from the rural zone who's learned with him and who's now playing at the Cavalo Marinho. So this guy will be, and Luis has taught many people, like many people. He has many, people loved him. He was such a great person. So the idea is that if the project travels to another state, then she'll invite somebody else from that state who's learned with him. So can go.
Thank you.
Okay, any other question?
No, I just want to add also that, well, thank you first of all. It was very interesting. I never thought about some archive concepts that you used here to address our personal images or pictures that are hidden in our house during years and years. But I see that the films and the pictures, they have a very artistic aesthetic, you know, they are not realistic in that. And how could the Luis and the others identify with this? This is really beautiful for us. This is wonderful. My question is, how do they identify with this kind of new perspective, imagetic?
Thank you. Interesting. I think like Luis, he was very he had been on stages for the last 25 years. So I think although he has this traditional, not only past but present, because he was still living, he never left the rural zone. But I think he was used to be on stage, to be with artists and the whole backstage, context. So I think for him the different thing was really to interact with images, because there was a bit of a direction, like you have to look backwards, and there was this monitor in front of him, and just a little bit of stage directing that he was not really used to. You have to look there and you have to interact a little bit, but there was. So for him, but he had Renata, and they are very good partners. So in the beginning, we wanted to have them separate on stage, one in each side. And Renata told me, no, this is not going to work. We need to be side by side, because we are always chatting. And they spend the whole cine concert chatting. And that's okay. That was this is part of the show, you just feel free, just interact a little bit, just look at the images and see what comes up. So each show was different, but they had each other. So they were really having fun and pointing out their friends, and the rehearsals were super fun too, because they were always, look, this guy, oh my God, and they kept doing this during the presentations, so they were always happy to see their past and their friends. So I think, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, let's move to the second speaker. Lenis Souza from the University of Aveiro, and he's going to present the paper entitled The Role of Researchers and Institutional Repositories in the Preservation of Digital Collections. Yeah, it's ready.
Bom dia. Primeiramente, eu quero agradecer à organização do evento por permitir essa apresentação em português, não é? do contrário eu não conseguiria apresentar. I don't speak English. E queria agradecer também a minha orientadora, Rosário Pestana, pela atenção, pelo carinho, pelo cuidado. Gostaria de agradecer também aos presentes próximos e aos presentes distantes. E quero agradecer também aos amigos que colaboraram em fazer esta comunicação universal, fazendo a tradução dos slides que vão ser passados aqui. Uma das presentes, uma das pessoas é a Evelyn Sacramento, que está aqui presente, e a Alice Agnes, que está no Brasil. Bom, esta comunicação é parte da minha investigação de doutoramento em Ethnomusicologia, intitulada como Dinâmicas de Existência e Sustentabilidade Zés Pereiras. É um projeto que está sendo financiado pela FCT, a Fundação de Ciência e Tecnologia de Portugal, no âmbito de uma linha específica onde trabalha com a colaboração com a instituição não acadêmica e a instituição acadêmica. A instituição não acadêmica que acolheu o meu projeto é a Instituição Cultural Ticense, que nós vamos conhecer um pouco mais tarde. Esse trabalho, ele alia tanto a necessidade acadêmica do conhecimento da prática musical em si, como a necessidade da associação em valorizar e dinamizar suas atividades culturais. É um trabalho que é feito para a associação e principalmente com a associação. Bom, o elo de pesquisa entre essas instituições são os espereiros. São esses grupos, esses agrupamentos musicais formados por músicos, tocadores de caixa, de bombo, gaitas de foles e por vezes encontramos essa formação com concertinas também. O circuito de atuação desses grupos, ele se dá com muita força nas festividades religiosas e acontece em suas localidades e atrai muitos visitantes nesse período de festa. A Associação Cultural Ticense, ela é uma organização sem fins lucrativos, né? Tem a missão cultural que se estende para lá da sua localidade, e ela foi criada por um grupo de amigos em 2001, com o objetivo de movimentar a cidade, trazer multiculturalidade ao seu município, que se chama Santo Tirso. Ao longo desses 22 anos, a associação tem realizado várias atividades, né? Dentre elas, festivais de banda desenhada, festival de música, que mais tarde nós vamos falar, que ele se torna importante nesse trabalho, que é o Palheta Bendita. Criou grupos de música, tem 3 grupos de música na escola, que é a Chulada da Ponte Velha, Pantomina, Gaiteiros da Ponte Velha, e eles fundaram também a Escola de Música, que é a Escola de Gaitas da Ponte Velha. Essas atividades que vocês estão vendo ilustradas aí já aconteceram este ano, né, que foi a queima do Judas, que aconteceu em frente à sede da associação, o 25 de abril, e aí a foto abaixo tem a escola, que funciona ainda semanalmente, tem aulas com os alunos e professores na escola de música. Bom, a CT desenvolve um trabalho assíduo na comunidade, como vocês percebem nas ilustrações, e ela tem a participação importante desses 2 músicos aí, que é o diretor da associação, o Nuno Dias, esse primeiro que está sorrindo aí na frente, e atrás o Napoleão Ribeiro. O Nuno Dias é presidente da direção da associação, ele toca no grupo Bombos da Reguenga desde os 16 anos de idade, começou a estudar gaita de fole em 2005, na escola que foi fundada pela associação, e depois tornou-se professor da própria escola. Ele é integrante do grupo Rusga de Reguenga, Gaiteiros da Ponte Velha e Chulada da Ponte Velha. O Napoleão Ribeiro, ele é membro fundador da ACT, é antropólogo no Gabinete do Patrimônio Cultural da Câmara Municipal da Tropa e integrante dos grupos de música da associação. Napoleão dedica-se ao estudo e registro de práticas musicais portuguesas especialmente relacionadas com a prática da gaita de foles. O projeto. Dentre todas essas ações que a associação desenvolve, o que se insere nesta apresentação é o projeto Os Espereiras, uma cultura musical do Entre Douro e Minho, que teve como pontapé inicial a exposição itinerante sobre as Espereiras, realizada em 2006 pela associação, no âmbito do festival que eles realizam, que se chama Palheta Bendita. Essa exposição teve uma boa repercussão, de forma que o Napoleão foi sendo convidado para palestrar sobre esse tema em vários lugares, e à medida dessas palestras iam acontecendo, o tema ia amadurecendo e enriquecendo, iam se inserindo novos elementos, novos personagens, de forma que em 2020 Napoleão já havia adquirido conhecimento suficiente e percebido a necessidade de sistematizar e registrar em audiovisual a prática desses grupos. E foi assim que nasceu o projeto em questão, elaborado em 2020 com a proposta de pesquisa etnográfica sobre as Espereiras, com o objetivo de contribuir essencialmente para a divulgação e salvaguarda do conhecimento da cultura dos Espereiras, em especial os seus ritmos, importantes marcas musicais no noroeste português. O projeto foi submetido no concurso 2020 Apoio e Projetos, Criação e Edição da Direção-Geral de Artes e contou ainda com apoio financeiro e de serviço das associações parceiras, amigas, Lerias, Associação Cultural, a Central Folk, a Associação Portuguesa para o Estudo e Divulgação da Gaita de Foles, a Câmara Municipal de Santo Tirso, o Coreto, a Associação Pé de Chumbo, Escala Púrpura e Nefum. Essas associações culturais, elas estão sempre envolvidas nas atividades também que a associação, que a ACT desenvolve. Quando vão tocar, por exemplo, a foto do 25 de abril, convidam os colegas das outras associações e eles se juntam para realizar as atividades. Bom, esse projeto, Os Espereiras, uma cultura musical dentro do Douro e Minho, ele foi necessário se realizar com várias pessoas, mas havia uma equipe núcleo, que foi o Nuno Dias, o Napoleão, o Tiago Soares, que é músico, a Bel Andrade, que ficou responsável por toda a parte de audiovisual, e a Maria Sofia Miranda. Participaram também os grupos e construtores, os grupos informais, os formais e as associações privadas sem fins lucrativos, e vários construtores. Não vou ler o nome de todos eles aqui, e vamos adiante. Bom, eu trouxe a ilustração do território para a gente perceber o alcance da associação. A associação se localiza ali no número 3 e a atividade se expandiu ali para o 1 ao 7. E essa região ela fica no norte de Portugal. O trabalho trouxe vários resultados, né? Tiveram 5 construtores participando, entrevistados, 29 músicos e 14 grupos. A escolha desses entrevistados, ela aconteceu por amostra territorial, né? Pela especificidade da coletividade, se é informal, se constituía uma empresa privada, se era uma associação sem fins lucrativos ou apenas um grupo que se juntava em família para poder realizar sua atividade. E também pelas famílias mais antigas. A questão da escolha das músicas, com esse trabalho que foi feito anteriormente, o Napoleão e o Tiago perceberam que o máximo que eles pudessem registrar de música seria importante por conta da diversidade musical que esses grupos trazem. Então, eles fizeram um registro de 225 músicas. Porém, fizeram a seleção de 60 músicas para fazer uma transcrição desse material. E essa seleção dessas 60 músicas, ela aconteceu pelo critério de... só um instante, gente. Pela função do protocolo da festa, porque eles participam das festas e têm os protocolos. e também pelas músicas, pelas peças mais antigas. Outro resultado desse trabalho foi a publicação de um livro com o mesmo nome do projeto. Esse livro tem 240 páginas, com os textos do Napoleão, as transcrições de música, que eu falei aqui para vocês, e cada transcrição tem um QR Code onde a pessoa pode acessar a música que está escrita ali com o grupo mesmo tocando. O livro traz informações que nunca foram estudadas sobre os espereiras, como os protocolos religiosos executados nos músicos, os códigos internos e algumas estratégias de aprendizagem que os músicos lançam mão quando estão juntos para aprender. Dada a importância desse livro, como uma publicação que até então a gente não tinha sobre os espereiras, eu vou falar um pouco mais sobre ele. No livro é possível ver um pouco a vida interna dos espereiras, como códigos e protocolos musicais, nomeadamente os trauteiros, que são mnemônicas utilizadas para facilitar a memorização dos ritmos, como ratanara, trigo, vinho, salpicão e outros. Também os termos secretos, como ir à espada. Esses grupos, eles quando vão tocar, normalmente são acompanhados por uma comissão de festa, que são seus contratantes. Então, eles às vezes querem falar uma coisa uns com os outros, mas não querem que os contratantes saibam. Então, eles estabeleceram uns termos para poder falar. Então, para beber, chama piar, cala-te, achanta-te, enfim. Os procedimentos ritualísticos realizados por esses grupos, ao redor da igreja, que eles dão as voltas, de manhã, quando chega o primeiro momento, o protocolo que eles fazem é dar a volta ao redor da igreja. Além da identificação da parte que compõe cada instrumento, que eventualmente, entre um grupo e outro, tem uma leve mudança, como chamar a baqueta de maceta, poucas mudanças. Sobre as transcrições. Essas aí são as transcrições que vem no livro. No livro, Napoleão afirma que cada grupo tem uma identidade musical própria, e foi isso que buscou se mostrar com as transcrições e com os vídeos. Tiago Manuel Soares, músico que participou deste projeto, desempenhando a função de diretor artístico e autor, mostra preocupação em esclarecer que as partituras não passam de uma interpretação sua. Outro resultado desse trabalho da associação é o acervo digital, uma parceria entre o projeto Ecomusic, desenvolvido no INET, e a ACT, possibilitada pela FCT. Surgiu tanto da necessidade de entender mais sobre os espereiras, como da preocupação de Napoleão de deixar os resultados do trabalho da ACT em um repositório institucional, para que pudesse facilitar a busca e o acesso de pesquisadores e interessados. O arquivo da ACT é resultado de convivências, de trocas e ações iniciadas em 2006, lá naquele festival que a gente falou no início. Olhar para ele como um simples suporte de dados seria ignorar o processo de convivência estabelecido entre ela e estes grupos. E talvez mais grave ainda seria não reconhecer que as ações da ACT, assim como a constituição da arquivista, nascem da força e da necessidade de homens e mulheres em função do presente de suas memórias. Busquei então analisar o arquivo em questão com base na história da arquivista e no pensamento de autores de outras áreas de conhecimento, como Merleau-Ponty, Jacques Derrida, Daniel Mello e Jorge Vigarelli, juntamente com a prática desenvolvida da ACT, de estabelecer a convivência em vários momentos com a comunidade, onde suas atividades se desenvolvem a partir das relações e interesses estabelecidos pelos seus sócios, colaboradores e comunidade local, sempre com o objetivo de promover a convivência coletiva em torno da prática musical, onde ocorre o processo de partilha de experiências e sentidos. Bom, então eu parti com a Declaração Universal da Unesco, que afirma que os arquivos registram decisões, ações e memórias, desempenham um papel essencial no desenvolvimento das sociedades, ao contribuir para a constituição e salvaguarda da memória individual e coletiva. Em 2016, o Conselho Internacional de Arquivo define arquivo como um conjunto de documentos de qualquer data, forma e suporte material, produzidos ou recebidos por qualquer pessoa, física ou jurídica, ou por qualquer organismo público ou privado no exercício de suas atividades. Bom, a declaração da Unesco, junto com o conceito do Conselho Internacional de Arquivos, nos abre a possibilidade de pensarmos no arquivo para além do papel e dos valores institucionais até então contemplados pela arquivista. Baseado na possibilidade de admitir ações e memórias, sejam individuais ou coletivas, assim como qualquer suporte material como documento, sugiro focar então nos dois elementos que estruturam um arquivo, que é a informação e o documento, pois é disso que ele é constituído e estão intrinsecamente ligados, como mostra Daniela Migues Porto. Da informação surge o documento, funcionando como suporte, fazendo transmitir assim uma ideia e mensagem. Em 1995, Jacques Derrida também constatou essa relação inseparável entre informação e documento, mas o autor foi mais além. Não há arquivo sem o espaço instituído de um lugar de impressão, externo, diretamente no suporte, atual ou virtual. Em que se transforma o arquivo quando ele se inscreve diretamente no próprio corpo? Certamente não conseguiria responder à pergunta de Jacques Derrida. Mas a partir dela, argumento que a importância de considerar o corpo como arquivo vivo no âmbito destas pesquisas, dessas práticas musicais, e o arquivo digital como uma ferramenta de aproximação entre as pessoas e os arquivos vivos. Merleau-Ponty afirma que só se compreende o papel do corpo na memória se a memória é não a consciência constituinte do passado, mas um esforço para reabrir o tempo a partir das implicações do presente. O arquivo vivo. O historiador Jorge Vigarello é enfático quanto à importância e o papel do corpo no processo de conhecimento. Em certas situações, especialmente quando a relação com a escrita e com o livro não é geral, o corpo pode revelar uma profundidade social por vezes inimaginável. Sem dúvida, o corpo é um arquivo. Esta profundidade está no cerne dos Espereiras, enquanto arquivo vivo, e nela, na profundidade, contém o que se deseja arquivar, imortalizar e se encontra no âmbito da subjetividade, onde o sentido da informação se apreende através da experiência vivida. O espaço de trocas promovido pela CT apresenta-se como um ambiente exitoso na salvaguarda do arquivo vivo, pois possibilita a fruição de memórias individuais e coletivas que se relacionam e fortalecem os vínculos afetivos, comunitários, temporais e identitários, que findam por contribuir com a salvaguarda das práticas vivenciadas, não como uma memória a ser guardada, mas como acontecimento vivo, presente e existente na comunidade, entre os grupos e a CT. Os arquivos digitais, aqui tratado, também foram construídos a partir de convivências e relações, onde a subjetividade está impressa no corpo e na partilha dos fazeres. E é este conjunto de coisas que conectam as pessoas aos Espereiras, uma vez que estes processos ocorrem no âmbito do arquivo vivo. Teria o arquivo digital o potencial de reabrir o tempo, como sugere Merleau-Ponty, e estabelecer uma conexão entre a subjetividade dos Espereiras, o arquivo vivo, e as pessoas? Ou estamos falando de mais um repositório com melhores capacidades de armazenamento e sistematização? A partir da compreensão do corpo como arquivo vivo e do espaço de convivência possibilitado pela ACT, seria correto dizer que o arquivo vivo e o arquivo digital da ACT alimentam um ao outro, na medida que o arquivo digital registra as experiências musicais vividas e, quem sabe, na sua função de fomentador, o arquivo digital poderá estimular outros corpos a viverem o que ali está registrado, em processos de convívio e de vida compartilhada, como ocorre com os grupos de espereiras. É um vídeo, é aqui, é aqui.
Se eu não estiver ali dentro,
Ele está.
tá?
Na mesma pasta.
Está na mesma pasta.
Hã?
Está na mesma pasta.
Sim,
Acho que não. Foi só foi a apresentação.
mas ele estava no slide. Caiu.
Olha ali em cima, isso, aparece ali.
Dá mais um.
Isso.
Ok.
Eu acho que vai ficar baixado. Tem, já.
Claro.
Considero, portanto, que o acervo digital da ACT, embora não consiga reproduzir fidedignamente os processos que acontecem nestas práticas musicais, vem a ser um suporte legítimo de parte da memória dos espereiras, que durante mais de um século não contaram com nenhum registro mais aprofundado de suas atividades, sendo ele, o acervo digital, um grande aliado na preservação do patrimônio cultural e material enquanto história. Thank you.
Obrigada, Lenice. Let me switch to English. Any questions? Lenice?
I have a question.
Yeah?
May I make the question in English? Is it okay for you?
No. Sorry.
But you can do it. I can say in English and then in
Okay, you
Portuguese.
can say both.
So, basically, it's a simple question. What is the role of gigantones with that performance? Gigantones are those big figures that normally walk with the musicians. So, are you considering this in your work? Queres reproduzir?
Sim, é um elemento que faz parte do grupo, que normalmente ele aparece em momentos mais especiais, uma festa maior, não é? E ele é um elemento figurativo mesmo, que ele serve de ligação entre o grupo e a plateia, né? Como um elemento mais cômico que participa daquele espaço ali. Nem todos os grupos têm, portanto, os gigatones. Alguns têm, outros não. Não é um elemento obrigatório de formação desses grupos. Além deles, também tem os cabeçudos, que são personagens menores, com as cabeçonas, né? Enfim, é isso.
Maybe she said that not all the groups who have those kind of identities. I mean, they are figures, enormous figures, and some of them are they just have the big heads, but are in the normal eye, I think. But you are not considering, tu não estás a considerar isso nessa lógica de uma base de dados. You are not considering this in your database. Your academy.
A Associação Cultural Ticense, ela fez, na minha pesquisa do doutorado, de modo geral, eles estarão presentes, né? E eles estarão presentes na CT na medida que eles aparecem nas atividades. Outros vídeos que estarão na base de dados vão trazer apresentações desses grupos que estarão lá, os gigatones e os cabeçudos, que tem alguns grupos que participam dessa pesquisa que foi mostrada aqui.
In the photos and in the videos, we could only see men. So is this a completely male tradition, or are women also involved? And if it's only a male tradition, how is your research going as a woman in this male sphere?
No. A prática musical dos Zés Pereiras, ela é uma prática realmente muito masculina, mas hoje já se encontram grupos com participação feminina e existem grupos também só de mulheres.
Nowadays you have some women in these kind of groups, but originally this was a man.
The second part of the question, and also does she feel as a woman in the middle of this?
Oh.
Bem, é assim, com alguns grupos que eu pesquisei, adentrar eu ainda fico muito tímida e eu sinto um certo cuidado com os participantes, com a minha presença, né? Um grupo que eu pesquisei que não faz parte desse repertório, desse acervo digital, o chefe do grupo, que era o seu Augustinho, quando ele me passava a agenda do grupo, ele nunca me passava o horário da noite, porque ele considerava que à noite não dava para eu estar presente. Então, assim, existe uma diferenciação no tratamento, sim, mas no mais a gente consegue se comunicar bem.
They feel that she feels that they deal with her in a different way because she's a woman, and she also referred an experience saying that sometimes when the schedule is at night, they don't send to her because she's a woman. So, and that in the beginning she was a bit shy in this context. Nowadays, it is okay. So, thank you so much. The elder is already online now. The second paper and the next one are connected because this work is developed under the umbrella of the same research project that is Eco Music, coordinated by Maria do Rosário Pestana. And the next paper is presented by Maria do Rosário Pestana and by Elder Caixinha, that is not feeling okay, so he will do it online. But I would like also to say that Rosario and Elder, they are assistant professors at the Department of Communication and Art here, Elder is an assistant professor in new media and Rosario in music.
Sociedad.
Oh, sorry. Huh?
Also SIBE.
I saw the
So,
your bio, the assistant professor. Isn't it?
yes, it is. I'm
So-
sorry. I wanted to promote her.
Thank you. So, what I would like to say is that it is usual in our department that hosts 4 different domains, music, design, art studies, and media, to have this kind of project with a team, with people from different areas, and this is very rich. And that's the case of Echo Music. So, Elder, good morning. Can you have the phone? You are mute. Okay.
Good morning.
Okay. Thank you. Are you okay? Já está. Eu já está.
Good morning, thank you so much for being here this morning. My dear colleague and dear friend, SIBE, and so he cannot be present today. He will participate through Zoom. And once he is always coughing, I will speak and he will work from his home. Well, we are going to start this presentation by listening to one woman's groups that participated in this project. O Sítio Subiu ao Céu is sung in
No, it is not me, it is he is sharing the screen.
Okay, sorry. Okay, Elder, could you please share the screen? Following the PowerPoint.
Here we are.
Now, please, could we listen? Thank you. Go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. This record was made in 2019, and the group was composed of Ana Martins, Custódio Oliveira, Luísa Campos, Emília da Silva, Dorinda Quental e Marcolina da Silva. During the last years, this group joined other groups to see their multi-part singing repertoire recognized in the National Inventory of Immaterial Cultural Heritage. The University of Aveiro was invited by the municipality of São Pedro to substantiate a proposal for inventorying women multi-part singing in Portuguese intangible cultural heritage. To respond to this challenge, we organized a team of researchers made up of ethnomusicologists musicians, an engineer, a videographer, and a designer. It was the team, was part of the team Álvaro Souza, António Ventura, Alberto Caixinha, Helena Marinho, Jorge Carlos Ribeiro, Jorge Graça, Joaquim Branco, João Valentim, Julieta Silva, Leia Managil, Rui Madeira, Rui Marques, Raquel Melo, and myself. During the field work, the team identified 4 main problems. With rare exceptions, the groups did not know or communicate one another. The movement of women multi-part singing migrants created disjunctures between location and rural imaginations. The majority of the groups were facing a lack of interest among young people and local cultural agents. Some groups refused to incorporate projects of other municipalities, with conflicts emerging due to the opposition of the political parties. In order to define an action strategy and overcome these difficulties, we organized discussion sessions between groups of the same locality and different localities. At the end, the singers and researchers decided to create an unifying name, Canto a Vozes de Mulheres, women multi-part singing, to express a repertoire of common knowledge, irrespective of the local names that this type of singing is given in different geographies, and create an association among groups from different municipalities to settle the conflict, local conflict, and create an open access digital archive to store and disclose their history and stories. Today we are going to talk to you about the digital archive. In a seminal article on memory and archive, Joana Padurai argued that archives are not only about memory and the trace of record, but about the work of the imagination, about some sort of social project or aspiration, underlying that there is a deep affinity between memory and desire, and by extension an affinity between memory and the capacity to aspire. Padurai continues, the archive as a deliberate project is based on the recognition that all documentation is a form of intervention, and thus that documentation does not simply precede intervention, but it is the first step. In the construction of our digital archive, we paid attention to these 2 dimensions. The digital archive we are going to talk about today was designed to be a site for the consolidation of a community, the community of women that share a repertoire of knowledge and memory, regardless of where they live, family lineage, or rural background. In that sense, this archive is related with sustainability, resilience, and stewardship. In this process, we researchers participated in the selection and attribution of meaning to the traditional polyphonies of Central and Northern Portugal, aware that these choices have consequences for our understanding of the collections and for their cultural value. Values such as the prestige of certain singers or affection in older women were some of the selected criteria that inevitably mark this archive. Due to the impossibility of the singers constituting a physical archive or museum dedicated to the women multi-part singing, or managing to represent it in the official physical archives in Portugal, as was their first aspirations, the researchers proposed to create a digital archive open to the public through a website. The singers aspired to see the documents produced by the ethnography over more than 150 years, gathered on the website. In the perspective, their perspective, those documents are valuable and true testimonies of their unique past. However, this desire collide with the interest and property rights of Portuguese archives and museums that hold these collections. The exhibition of historical documents that attest to the long-term existence of this practice and this collective is one of the requirements of the ICH recognition process. Although this requirement collides with the absence in Portugal of a policy of restitution of historical documents. We were thus unable to provide extensive evidence of the antiquity of this singing. After having discussed their aspirations and constraints, we decided that a digital archive and website should achieve the three main aspirations: raise awareness of a repertoire unknown to the majority of the Portuguese people, provide a space for the singers to represent themselves, recount their stories, and aggregate their shared social memory, extend the singers' future horizons in possibility, hopes and expectations, both in the intangible cultural heritage field and in the field of informed, creative and cultural citizenship. To fulfill this mission, we used private database located at the University of Aveiro, which had already been created by my colleague Elder Caixinha. This was where we placed the historical documents identified during biographic and archival research and the selected number of documents produced by the research team during the field work between 2016 and 2022. We are now looking at the database with the fields that each of the researchers fulfill. My colleague is showing the database. This specific record that we are now looking mentions a meeting of women. It is a digitalization of a local newspaper. The selection production of documents for the database was discussed between researchers and singers. We took into account Barbara Kinchenblatt-Kimbrett warning relative to ethnographic documents and artifacts being, in fact, ethnographers' documents and artifacts, as she said. Apadurai adds to this debate when he sees all documentation as intervention, as referred before. Keeping in mind this warning, we decided to share the intentions and the authorship of the documents production with the singers and foster the meaning that they and we wanted to endow them with. Frequently, it was the singers who decided, for example, what they wanted to be recorded and how they wanted to be represented. For example, some singers wanted to be represented wearing their local traditional customs. Others did not. Some aimed to create traditional situations. Others did not. Once the sound and video recording were completed, we edited them. These recordings were too heavy for our database, which only supports records to up to 200 megabytes. Here, we also had to be selective, prioritizing the moments in which they sang or giving preference to the description of memories and intentions. We acknowledge each one of the records that were produced as being a statement or a fragment of a statement of aspirations of the singers and researchers concerning the digital archive and the future of women multipart singing. If the database compelled us to think about our roles as document makers, the website forced us to reflect on our role as narrators of the digital collection. We understood that we had various discursive layers at hand in addition to the discourse embodied in each of the document statements. the discourse arising from the set of those statements, and the discourse of the documentaries. We could use the website space to convey other discursive dimensions. We were aware that the showcase of the digital archive would inevitably lead the website visitors through itineraries along the lines that we had previously established. Consequently, we revisited the discussion about the website discourses and narrative. In other words, the stories that it should tell, and the many doors that this archive could open, in the perspective of the singers and researchers. Hence, the website was designated not only to represent this community of practice based on its own vision and its own voice, but also to express its aspirations and pave the way to a future of possibilities for this singing in the 21st century. The website opens, please, Alder, could you please show the website? We are not in,
I think he was
Just
trying.
loading.
yes, I think it's fine, but we need to have another window. Maybe you could close the PowerPoint and then, okay. The website opens with the history of women multi-part singing narrated in a documentary. In this documentary, we began by describing the shared history of the past experienced by different K players, taking the viewer on a path towards the perception of a future of women multi-part singing, open to a myriad of possibilities. The documentary was one of our discursive ways in this website. We put the documents and organized around some themes that we are discussing when the website opens, but also we work on making videographs or documentaries in order to communicate with a large public and a large audience about this subject. Because, as I told before, in Portugal there are a few people listen or know this type of singing as being a traditional music from Portugal. Well, I think that we have a problem. But after the documentary, we created a space dedicated to giving voice to the singers in the singular, be it in the singular persons, speaking about their own stories, or in group, speaking about the dynamics that they have with each other's, the memories of singing in old times and in the present. There's some problem. I don't know what it is. Maybe problem with the internet. Well, I don't know. The following space of the website focused on memories of multi-part singing and the terms that are used locally to express this form of singing. Sharing the memory of multi-part singing was an explicit aspiration from the very first roundtables that we organized. The memories led some of the website visitors through itineraries as distinct. Wow, there is the website. So this is a documentary section. Now, the documentary section, the other, well, I think that we don't have time to show Elder. Yes, we have one part is dedicated to the singers in order to present themselves and make notice about women with projects and with a particular path. Well, now I think I lose myself. Well, the memories led some of the website visitors to itineraries as distinct as the experience of some atmosphere of multi-part singing in leisure moments. I'm referring to a repertoire learning in the 70s of the last century during the forest plantation, works in the center of Portugal, or family life, or incorporation of this repertoire in political intervention music during the period following the Carnation Revolution in 1974 in Portugal. So we have a lot of stories from different women from different places, women with different paths. The mapping of the multi-part singing that we are looking now groups was a proposal of the researchers, which enables identifying the groups with geographical locations. And why did we propose that? Because, as I told you before, those groups, when we start working with them, didn't know each other. And so they didn't know that there are other women some kilometers away that sang identical repertoires that they sang. And so we decided to create a map in order where we put, Elder, could you please open one example of the map in order to show what we have inside each of the groups, each of the localities. We put all the documentation that we selected for this archive. We have selected, as I told since the beginning, this is a selection of documentation. After the presentation of the groups, okay, thank you, Ellen. The website wanted to reveal the three powers underpinning the sustainability of these musical processes in the 21st century. The activism of the singers, the transfer of knowledge, and creativity. Creativity is a really problem in this context. Once most of the groups doesn't allow themselves to create a new repertoire. Included, they omit when they create some lyrics, they don't tell, because they know that if they assume that they create that part of the song, they will be criticized by the local folklorists. And so we created a moment inside dedicated exclusively to this subject. And we also created a time frame to express the historical dimension of these musical practices. Folklorists and ethnographers have gathered collections and sound records and music transcriptions over more than 150 years, as I told you before. Today, these ethnographers' products are fragments of the history of women multi-part singing. The first difficulty that we encountered in drawing up this timeline concerned property rights, as I told before. The property rights of national archives and museums prevent us from placing all the documentation found by our research team on the website, as the singer had wanted. And the limitation undermines our intention to express the historical dimension of this musical practice. While we do not have the time to detail the website, following space, rooms, it should be said that they shed light on the atmospheres of the memory, in which women multi-part singing is heard in the 21st century on the media and role of the music industries in disclosing this musical practice. To conclude, okay, in the construction of the digital archive, we took on the role of mediators, facilitators, and promoters of an ethics of possibility, aimed at enhancing positive expectations as to the future of the repertoire of knowledge possessed by the singers and enabling them to represent themselves autonomously. In order to undertake this commitment and cooperation with our discussion partners, the researchers had to go beyond. Indeed, break with academic and disciplinary prerogatives. Our experience with databases and websites had been restricted to the dissemination and communication of science in the context of our research projects. The Women Multipart Singing archive and website forced us to go outside our comfort zone and explore these technologies for the benefit of our partners. Although this archive didn't solve answers, all the desires, or solve all the tensions that emerged during the research. Different world visions inside this community of practice, different assumptions about what is or should be the document, or included about what should be the role of researchers, were negotiated during this process, but they were not solved. When we start to construct this archive, we almost believed in the 20th century light utopia of the internet as a public space open to everyone. But along our path, we began to understand the threats embodied in this fragile structure. The impossibility of allocating historical records that are under protection of rights institutions, or our dependence on the University of Aveiro generosity in supporting this archive, gigabytes over the coming years. This dependence jeopardizes the digital archive sustainability. So this archive is an effort, it's something that we have made together, that I could present it today for you, and that I hope that will be still on the internet in the following years, although we don't know. We cannot control that aspiration of our singers. We did the first step, and this is our problem. Thank you.
And Elder. So let's open. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the isolation of these groups, that they really weren't in communication with one another. Do they share a common repertoire of music? And if so, how do they? So I was just saying how it's interesting to me that these groups operate in isolation from one another, and I'm curious how the repertoire is perpetuated, and if they share a common repertoire, if they really weren't collaborating with one another.
Well, yes, that was the problem that we faced. In decades ago, this is a large repertoire shared among the central and north of Portugal. But during the institutionalization process of folklore in Portugal, as in other countries, women multi-part singing was not an issue, was not interesting, because it was, in my opinion, sung by women, and with those voices that sometimes we cannot listen. And so, impossible to listen as it was written. And so, this type of singing was not disseminated, and the Portuguese didn't know about it. But inside some localities, inside big families with several women inside same house, same home, and or in localities where the singing still have significance in local festivities. Groups maintain a small activity singing. Our role in this process was to put them together and make them speak with each other and discuss the interest in develop a common project. The way they sing in different localities are not exactly the same, including the number of the voices that overlap are different from localities to other localities, but they share the same songs with small difference, and when they are together, we always sing together. And so it's in fact a knowledge that is shared, skills, a lot of skills that are shared by those women. Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Rosario. That was very, very interesting. And my short question would be, do you know how many people use that website? Because I think the website is a wonderful tool for, we can discuss about archives, but the website is wonderful. That's really wonderful, but I wonder how much it is used.
Well, I really don't know. Elder, do you know if it is possible to know how many people use the website?
No, you can count.
No? Elder, I think that you have.
Sorry. We have some mechanisms of Google Analytics that tell us that we have thousands of visitors during the last years, but we don't have, I don't have at least a very updated number for that, but the last time that I checked, it was more than 10,000 visitors from the point where the date where the site was on, but I don't have the updated numbers for now. But I can say for sure that thousands of visitors, for sure.
Thank you, Elder. Well, Elder knows the quantitative number of the users, but I have an idea of the more qualitative use of this site, and my feeling is that it's mostly seen by young girls from urban places, and included inspired theater project in the last months.
Yes. We heard also last year during the World Conference some groups from northern Portugal, and I know also works by Uncle Frier about women singing in northern Portugal from the 60s and 70s. So my question would be, did you cooperate also with other researchers outside of Portugal for this wonderful project you are doing?
Well, thank you. We organize an association, and the association has a consultative committee with researchers from different areas of Portugal and out of Portugal that were in the past interested in this type of singing in Portugal. And they are very important in both the application for the intangible cultural national inventory of intangible cultural heritage, and both in the discussion of some other projects, not this archive, this virtual archive in the format of website, but other projects that the singers have been developed. The idea is that the researchers and the singers, the researchers act as being as the stage, the backstage of the association, working with them for their purpose.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rosario. Thank you, Elder. I now invite all of you to go to the best spot of the university.
So thank you. Let's move to our next session. It's called Building Networks Through Sound Archives. Unfortunately, we are not going to have here Eduardo Aires de Abreu. He had personal problems, he could not attend to the conference. Consequently, we have more time for the two presenters, so it's my pleasure to introduce you, my dear colleague, Miguel Garcia, who is a principal researcher at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council in Argentina, and a tenured professor of anthropology of music at the University of Buenos Aires. He is also the director of the journal El Oído Pensante, a very important journal in the area of music, and also co-chair of the ICTM study group on sources and archives for music and sound studies. So, thank you, Miguel.
Good morning. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for coming. And my thanks to the organizers and the institutions, the library, the university. Thank you, Pedro and Susana, for the invitation. So, the focus of my presentation is the sound archive accessible through the virtual environment. I call this kind of archive, for the moment, a virtual sound archive. As stated in the title, I'll discuss some intersections found between institutional and non-institutional archives and the general framework in which this phenomenon occurs. As far as I know, we don't have yet an exhaustive typology of this kind of archives. There are only a few partial attempts to do that. But, again, for the moment, I make a very simple distinction between institutional and non-institutional archives. In most cases, this distinction is equivalent to non-commercial institutions and commercial enterprises. I take the perspective of the so-called end user. With the advent of digitization and the virtual environment, many types of users have appeared. Systems operators, system and database administrators, customers, subscribers, end users, and so on. The particularity of the end user consists in that they don't have the skill of the technician, but do know how to insert inputs to get the outputs they want. Let's say that an end user is a competent actor in using software and interfaces, and in keeping in black boxes what exists that which they know. Some of you are archivists or archival administrators, and most of your tasks are addressed to end users. That means that end users are receivers of several of your archival activities and policies. And most of those receivers are researchers in ethnomusicology and in other disciplines, that is, experts, navigators, and black box creators. The main idea that I want to present is that, from the aforementioned perspective, the boundaries of institutional and non-institutional archives tend to get blurred. This phenomenon is driven mainly by two factors. the presence of the same sound files on various websites, and the possibility offered by the graphical interface of our devices to manage multiple archives on the screen simultaneously. To widen and support this idea, I approach the following topics: the platformization of everyday life, the ubiquity of the sound file, and the archive on the screen. First topic. Many researchers have pointed out that since the end of the 20th century, digital technologies and the internet have instigated a general storage mania and a proliferation of both public and private archival practices. In the field of music, the expansion of storage capacity of personal devices, the arrival of the audiophile format, and piracy were the key factors for something that could be called downloading fever. Perhaps the technological innovation that had more impact on this process was the audiophile format, particularly the MP3 format, a byte storage unit which can easily be created, modified, deleted, distributed without expert knowledge. As it had never happened before, the audiophile format has significantly enhanced our ability to disaggregate, aggregate, and distribute sound. But the downloading fever began to slow down with the arrival of streaming. We know that. While during the downloading fever, we possessed sound recordings, now we are accessing them mostly through hyperlinks. While in the context of downloading fever, we kept the recordings in our personal and institutional rooms, in the present, the storage is very often made at web servers. The controversial philosopher Byung-Chul Han summarizes this idea in a very accurate way. We are moving from possession to access. I have already talked about this in Brussels during the meeting of the study group on sources and archives. The passage from downloading fever to streaming is happening in the framework of the so-called platformization of everyday life. Many of our decisions, acquisitions, and activities are realized through playing with platforms. Music is not an exception. Platforms are programmable interfaces created under a data-based business model. Platforms as Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Apple Music, Deezer, Tidal, and many others sell music and, at the same time, make data extractivism and generate personalized advertising. Our relationship with music is becoming more and more a platform-mediated practice, and it has a massive short and long-term impact. Platforms are the axis around music. Music is created, promoted, stored, listened to, distributed, and sold. Nevertheless, what I want to stress in this presentation is that platforms have a huge effect on research and on what we call archive. Let's move to the following point to approach and clarify in some way this matter. Platforms and other websites put in evidence the ubiquity of the sound file. I mean, they show the presence of the same sound file in different sites and the presence of the sound file which we use for research in the so-called transactional archives, as Spotify, Amazon, and so on. Let me give you some examples of these two kinds of phenomena. A version of the well-known tango La Comparsita is available to listen to in an institutional archive, such as the Biblioteca Digital Hispánica, hosted in the National Library of Spain, and at the same time, it is accessible in non-institutional archives, such as YouTube, Apple Music, Amazon, Spotify, SoundCloud, AWA.FM, this is a Japanese streaming service, and in many other personal websites created by fans, collectors, and also by institutions. So, we have the same sound file in different kinds of archives. That means that we can listen to the same recording under different conditions, different compressions, with different metadata, with different images, different policies of access for free or for a charge, different types of curations, with or without data extractivism, etc. The virtual environment is a little bit chaotic. Regarding the second phenomenon, the presence of the sound files which we use for research in media platforms, surprisingly, it is possible to find many examples. For instance, there are songs of Afro-American rituals, like candomblé and others, in institutional archives, and also on Spotify. And in SoundCloud. In many cases, the circulation of those songs is or should be limited because they are part of initiation processes and are frequently associated with non-human beings. Now, uploaded to those platforms, the ritual songs are open to non-ritual interests and are treated as a commodity. At the same time, the people who listen to them become prosumers and are victims of data extractivism. Another interesting case is Alan Lomax's field recordings. Maybe you already know that 11 of Lomax's original albums are available to listen to on Spotify. But I don't have time to deal with this case, and I already approached this case in another presentation. This is Go Max in Spotify. Third point. All these phenomena happened in the cloud, a metaphor created to hide or romanticize the materiality of media capitalism. Actually, the cloud is a net of servers that store, process, and sell data and software. Most of the sound files we use for research are hosted and controlled by some of the more than 1,000 servers located around the world. Under the cloud, to go on with the metaphor, are the end users. And between them, there are many interfaces. The nearest interface for the users is the screen, a multitask surface that they see and touch. The main activity realized on the screen consists in inserting inputs and receiving outputs, which has consequences for the sound archives and also for archives in general. The point is that the graphical user interface allows end users to manage multiple archives on the same screen simultaneously. When I looked for the tango la comparsita, I was able to open in my screen 25 different sound archives, institutional and non-institutional. At the same time, I was able to open many non-sound archives in order to enlarge the metadata that are normally very poor on platforms like Spotify or YouTube. Many individual archives became one on my screen. We could also say the screen became a huge archive. The screen became an archive of archives. What I want to stress with this description of the use of the screen is that something is wrong. This is the image. Okay, so what I want to stress with this description of the use of the screen is that thanks to technology, as it never happened before, the end users have got the power to play with archives. Conclusions. I have tried to prove two phenomena tend to blur the boundaries between different types of virtual sound archives. The ubiquity of the sound file and the possibility to merge, combine, and overlap different archives on the screen and convert it into one big multi-source archive. Some of the consequences of this phenomena are, or could be, A. Gradually, the institutional sound archives seems to be no longer at the center of the research activities, at least in the field of the study of popular culture, popular music, and so on. V. Nowadays, many research projects are being conducted with sound sources hosted on Spotify, YouTube, and other kinds of platforms and websites. C. Usually, these platforms are more versatile for searching, playing, sending, and downloading files than institutional archives. Sorry. That's capital. Usually, the metadata offered by these platforms is poorer than that offered by institutional archives. But this problem can be fixed on the screen itself by searching information in another website. Non-institutional archives are getting as reliable as institutional ones because every piece of information can be checked immediately on the same screen without leaving your chair. And maybe this is an answer for the question made by Gerda yesterday. No, I have two more consequences. The end users will be probably demand from institutional archives the versatility that they find in non-institutional ones. If so, institutional sound archives accessible through the virtual environment will change, pushed by external demands. Is it an answer? Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you, Miguel, for this wonderful presentation. I think this is the future. We have now to discuss a lot about it. So the floor is open for questions.
But two things. One, may I get a copy of your paper because I want to share it? I'm not joking. Your observations are so astute, and I really want to share them with technologists at my work to explain to them how they're where we are failing and how we can do things about it. But I was just cheering your entire talk. And the other thing I wanted to say is your observation about the cloud. I was just having this conversation with somebody that the cloud is this metaphor, and it's not a cloud, and you were saying that it's actually a network. And what I would say is beyond that, because we were talking about sustainability yesterday, the cloud is actually a network of server farms that are parked next to giant power plants. They take tremendous amounts of electricity. The cloud is this brilliant piece of abstraction that removes the physicality of this stuff and the actual energy that it takes to make it available to us, and sort of obscures the questions of sustainability around it. But I really appreciate your observations about the relationship between institutional and non-institutional archives. I would also love to get a copy of your paper about the Alan Lomax report. I work in the library conference.
Yeah, my presentation is work in progress because it's about technology and the practices related to technology. So both are changing all the time. So we have to correct our ideas all the time.
Constantly.
On the other hand, the studies of this field are very unstable, is the word? Unstable, trembling, yeah? Because, for instance, we have a lot of words and expression to talk about the same phenomena. We say, I used virtual environment, but it is possible to use media environment, media ecosystem, virtual ecosystem, the cloud, the net, the nets, the internet, the web, the cyberspace, also Google. So my reflection is through the way that we talk about this space. But of course, something physical is behind the metaphor, the cloud, of course. Thank you for your words.
I think we have another question here.
Thank you for your presentation. I would just like to mention two things. We are very worried about the rights of the images and videos that we put or are used from ourselves. For instance, we are here and we are filmed and we are recorded and we have user agreements in a way to disclose our own point of view. But we never think. I wonder how many of you ever read the ILA agreement when you sign up an account in YouTube, for instance, or any other, where they have the right to use as they want every content, including changing the content, not only erasing. So there's a problem because we are using those same platforms without knowing that they can change everything. Most of the time, actually, when you put a song, for instance, on Spotify, they will change the dynamic range, they will change sometimes the tuning. So we have physical visualizations without knowing that that song is not this song. It was changed, and we agree without listening or reading those same EOLA agreements. And there's a big problem for me, which is the capabilities of database are not measured in technical difficulties, are measured in manpower.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the hours that the programmers put for to build it. And that's easy to understand in a platform that is highly rich in publicity, and the revenues are immense. And how can the institutional platforms face against those huge amounts of money that come from Spotify, that come from YouTube, that come from SoundCloud? We cannot, actually, we cannot. So we should reflect in a way to deal with these matters. And the fact that those platforms change and are in fact owner of what we put there. It's not us. You put a video on YouTube, the owner is YouTube, not you. Don't forget that.
Don't forget it.
That's it.
Thank you. 2 days ago, I read in the newspaper that Spotify is fighting against the incorporation of fake songs created with artificial intelligence to its platform. So now we have fake songs, and we researchers have to deal with fake songs. A new scenario, absolutely new scenario. So, thank you.
Because we are talking that 20 years ago I saw an algorithm composing and playing at will Mozart's music. 20 years ago. And it was if you don't know every composition of Mozart, you will be sure it was Mozart. But it was not.
So, one more question here.
Thank you, Miguel. It's more informative. It's what was not a problem. I was in March in the indigenous community in Aveiro, and there were more people filming than performing white color rituals. Young indigenous people, they film and they put it up to YouTube. So the big question for that ethno also is the problem with the younger inside communities, how to deal with that problem, because they give all the rights directly. We are talking about rights management and how we can perform better, but I mean, it's still going in the same segments via WhatsApp sender, so there are so many videos just uploaded and the more they are performed. Just want to give a comment in this direction, and I don't know what to do. I have no
I don't have an answer.
But
think maybe you might.
Well, no, I certainly don't have an answer. But all I was going to say is, is that everything we've been talking about the ethical obligations that we have. So that's those are constraints on the institutional archives that you were talking about, and not the commercial archives are completely unconcerned with that, and so there's this like imbalance between the availability not through commercial outlets and the ethical framework that institutions are trying to work within. And so it's interesting what you were saying about how metadata can kind of be instantly, you can determine whether or not something is accurate or not. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that, just because institutions are running so far behind the commercial enterprises. Hypothetically, the institutions have more accurate metadata. I mean, I realize that's very hypothetical, but the pressures on institutions are so different than the pressures on the commercial interests that we will never keep up. So I think that there's an interesting tension created by the availability through commercial outlets and the sort of authoritative information that institutions claim to provide.
Thank you.
You want to comment?
No.
Yeah, I think it's also a question of, if we already know that we can't keep up, whether we try to do something else, because I think this whole issue about rights and ethics will become more pressing, and also sustainability, because we all know that things can just vanish from 1 minute to the next. So I think this kind of long-term preservation, right, legal and ethical clearance and whatever, I think maybe it's better to focus on something else and say that, well, that's what we provide, if you want easy access for everyone, quickly put it on YouTube, but if you want something else, put it here. So I think instead of just running behind and knowing that you will never reach that, maybe we should focus on other things and say that's what we offer. And I think this will become more important, because also in the energy crisis, I mean, can all these huge server platforms, can they continue to exist? Is this really something that's sustainable? So I think it's an idea to maybe take something from the platforms and think, okay, that's what we like, in the sense of easily searched and attractive to look at. But I think we should focus on other things, really, and trying to live up to the same thing.
I agree with you, of course.
Thank you. Some questions? Comments? So thank you, Miguel. So let's move on to our next presenter. I'm sure you all know Gerda last night, but I have to present. So Gerda, she worked at the Phonogram Archive of the Austrian Academy of Science. She was curator of the historical collections and editor of the CD edition, the complete historical collections, as well as of the Phonogram Archive Yearbook International Forum on Audiovisual Research. So, thank you, Gerda, please.
Thank you, Pedro, for the nice introduction. Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to say that I'm very, very happy to be here, to listen to these lively discussions, to learn about so many different approaches. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank everyone who makes it possible that I'm here. Kerstin, you have just started what I wanted to say, that we are going back again. I think Miguel's thoughts are very important to keep in mind what is really going on in the world, because our world is not their world. We are very small. Not to say we are not visible to some extent. We try to do our best, but we have to take care of these things. And in my presentation, we go back in history, and to say it much more provocative, I'm history. And that was what I was asked to present here to some extent. Dietrich Schüller, the former director of the Phonogram Archive and general editor of the CD publication of the complete historical collections, highlighted the innovative and auspicious plan of this edition in his preface. In 1999, it's long ago, he wrote that the Phonogram Archive, quote, breaks new ground among the international community of related institutions, end of quote. Let us remember the beginnings, the influence of the digital era, and where we are today. I can't give an answer, but let's see if it works. Okay. My reflections will start with a short overview on how this project started, followed by outlining the adaptations over the years, the significance of networks, and finally assessing this edition in respect of today's demands concerning open access, digital archives, and institutional repositories, as it is the topic of this meeting. The historical collections, these are the recordings dating from the time before the introduction of the tape recording around 1950, were of interest not only to scholars but also to the descendants of the recorded and the general public, especially in the regions of their origin. That increasing interest since the 1960s resulted in the idea to publish these historical collections. But how to start? A pilot project was undertaken to find out either particular collections already well known because of existing publications or famous names of scholars, or the complete stock should be edited and published. The result recommended the publication of the historical collections as a complete, commented, source-critical edition. Within the pilot project, it turned out that quite a few recordings, mostly those made in the archive, were preserved but not widely known, and thus had not raised any interest until then. Following the founding motion, the Phonogram Archive preserves recordings made either in the field or in the archive and comprise, as we have heard already, language and music, voice portraits and so-called varia, as cries, animal sounds, and others, from all over the world. When studying the printed and typed catalogs, recordings of the same cultural region or recordings from different regions but comprising the same language, music styles or genres, made at different times popped up. At that time, the additional value of such findings had not been recognized, and research questions, for instance, changes in interpretation, were not posed until then. A complete edition, however, would offer the knowledge of much more recordings, enabling a survey of field researchers, their research goals and methods. Such findings shed additional light on the history of institutions and sciences as such. Therefore, the publication initially was meant to assemble sound documents from the same cultural region recorded, either in the field or in the archive, at different times by different scholars with different ideas and goals. That would have been an innovative approach. At first, Series 1 was thought to include all recordings made in the field and in the archive in 1901. This was the year when the real work in the Phonogram Archive started, to illustrate and explain the ideas in respect of contents and recording technology. Unfortunately, only the first expeditions were published as Series 1. The language recordings were attached to the respective language series, and the voice portraits were included in the respective series. Series 3, however, as an example, is focused on a region, namely Papua New Guinea. Thanks to the already existing contact with Donalds, who had been interested in early sound recordings of the region and visited the Phonogram Archive and other institutions in Vienna which stored additional documents such as pictures, diaries, and human remains. This series received an important input from outside and shaped the layout of the commons. As a specialist in this field, Niles edited the rather well-known collection of Rudolf Pech and the lesser-known ones of Josef Windhuis and Wilhelm Schmidt. The Pech and Windhuis recordings were made in course of their expeditions. Schmidt's recordings in the archive. Schmidt's performer was a servant who was brought to and then stayed with him. A questionable situation. Anyway, this compilation allows insight in the attitude of each researcher, the respective approach, research methods, and the working process. Such considerations are well documented as well as in the in-depth information about the contents and the appraisal from today's point of view. Thus, these data and critical comments provide further research. The institutional network turned out to be very important for the edition. This is evident also in course of financial considerations. Distinct collections aroused very high interest. Corporations then not only covered the content-related part, but also generated financial deals. Such initiatives first were started with former so-called sister institutions. Such institutions were founded for the purpose of scientific exchange, and the phonogram gives technical support. One of such institutions was the Zurich Phonogram Archive, founded in 1909. The Swiss recordings were made with the Vienna Archivphonograph, while archiving as such was shared between Zurich and Vienna. Thanks to the renewed close cooperation 100 years later, the historical recordings of Swiss dialects, largely housed in both archives, but occasionally only in Vienna or Zurich, have been brought together. They are published in 3 volumes. The joint publication with the Institute of Ethnology and Folklore Research in Zagreb, formerly the Department of Folk Music, founded in 1921 as part of the Ethnographic Museum, is based on the decision to include all the Croatian material housed in the Vienna Phonogram Archive and recorded in the first half of the 20th century, either on the territory of today's Croatia or among Croats living outside Croatia. The first part, comprising recordings from 1901 to 1936, is made up of all the smaller collections, while the second part will comprise the most extensive collection among these holdings, compiled by Milovan Gavazzi and Božidar Širola during the 1920s in cooperation between Vienna and Zagreb. Certainly, such cooperations shaped the approach and results, but it never was a problem to adapt new ideas within the target of the edition. The complete edition, therefore, promised to establish a basis for historical considerations and the development of various disciplines, as stimulated by scholars, their research questions and research methods, culminating at the cross point of a research sound archive. The inclusion of the historical collections on the part of UNESCO as documents of universal significance in the World Register of its Memory of the World program encouraged the Phonogram Archive to follow up this project, using or reviving the existing contacts and increasing the network of scholars of various disciplines like ethnomusicologists, linguists or historians, but also of local specialists or performers, as well as technicians working in the audio and digital domain. The project took place, and now we are coming closer to today, within a time of fast and tremendous technical changes. The digital world opened new perspectives, but also asked for big challenges and thus changes in the archival world. No longer, archives could be seen as delimited institutions, as places where only trained scholars could enter, and the archivists acted as the owner of the stocks. Once, strict rules organized an archive, also with the result that the knowledge produced there was seen as given and rarely discussed. Cultural theories and debates in archival sciences, as well as the encounter between the colonial, the archival, and the digital, marked the starting point for rethinking archives and setting them in a broad international focus of discussion about colonial, post, and decolonial studies. In the 1970s, the Phonogram Archive recognized the digital turn and announced that any printed catalog wouldn't be planned furthermore, but a digital one would be available, the basis for further online access. The Phonogram Archive either was leader in associations, for instance in the National Association for Sound and Video Archives, or was embedded in various networks. This attitude has been a feature since its foundation. Being the first research sound archive worldwide, the contacts to other archives shaped the work and the position as forerunner within the networks of sound archives. That fact had positive impact on the edition project. Initially, the edition was thought as a tripartite one, presenting the sound documents slightly enhanced on the CD, the original documentation on the CD-ROM and commentaries, as well as translations and transcriptions in booklet format. At that time, we thought that such a format would be a user-friendly package all over the world, also in remote regions. It also seemed to be the ideal format to give back those cultural expressions to the countries and people of origin. Shaped by the debates of the time, the red boxes, our CDs have a red cover, comprised the culture documented by the scholars, fixed on the recordings, collected and preserved in archives far away, and technically prepared for repatriation. The progression of digitization and easy access influenced the composition of this publication. Being already partly digital, the edition turned out to be a starting point for new objectives. When Europeana, the virtual library to discover Europe's digital cultural heritage, started, the first series of the Phonogram Archives edition were included on this portal. But also the publishing house, the Austrian Academy Sciences Press, pushed open access publications. Therefore, in 2017, when Series 16 was published, the edition has somewhat changed its layout. In fact, the data disc now comprises the texts formerly published in the booklet. This decision represents a further step towards electronic publication. The data disc is organized in folders and chapters. As a new feature, the transcriptions are additionally linked to the respective sound files in the compressed format MP3. Nevertheless, the sound files on CD quality are still available on the audio CDs. In any case, it will be possible to listen and read at the same time, which has proved important when dealing with this commented source edition. For preservation reasons, we opted for the production of a tangible medium in a small edition to be stored in libraries and archives. The project needed a person in charge to keep things in perspective, to organize the working steps from re-recording up to comments to network to accompany the production process. Already existing contacts could be used, but new ones were necessary, specifically to the manifold topics. It was favorable to be unbiased and active in finding persons were interested and skilled. These contacts opened new views, approaches, and epistemological projections which shaped the discussion about the recordings. Depending on their respective subjects, the comments became more detailed, critical, and reflexive, driven by the present debates on power relations, the relation between researchers and archivists, and by rethinking the historical background. All in all, the work was not only shaped by the input of various colleagues, their knowledge and experience, but also by the digital turn and the mission statement of democratizing knowledge to create a digital cultural heritage as called by Europeana and postulated by UNESCO. Finally, the question comes up, to what extent can the edition of the historical collections be seen as a starting point of initiatives of open science, digital archives and institutional repositories? And what is the role of networks? Assessing the edition's work and goal in respect of the three keywords, I think that some features of these modes of operation are rudimentary perceivable. The indispensable basis is the digitization of the sounds and documents, a work which was started immediately after the beginning of the project. The re-recording is a time-consuming procedure, therefore the digitization was done according to the respective series. Digitizing the protocols was done entirely. A database for the whole stocks of the phonogram archive was designed, giving access to the contents of the recordings. The historical recordings were included in the database, accompanied by audio examples. This online catalog serves as digital entrance to the sound and written documents. As open science means another kind of cooperation in the scientific practice, namely to include the interested public for contributions to increase new knowledge, the idea of the edition was going in the opposite direction. The publication was thought for the interested public to inform about their past cultural activities. Only over the time the descendants of the recorded were asked to enrich the information. The digital data were handed over to them. Thus, a kind of collaborative networking began. The demand of open science is to use optimally digital techniques to make transparent, reproducible and usable scientific processes via internet has not been fulfilled, because the data preserved in the phonogram archive, as we all know, are sensible, refer to personal data protection and need negotiation of, for instance, copyrights or intellectual property rights. These barriers are not solved and occupy all institutions preserving personal data. It was very helpful to have a widespread network, institutionally and personally. During many meetings and intensive discussions, one could learn from each other and experience various methods. The edition has been presented on the website since the publication of the first series. This part of the website could be seen as a partition of a kind of institutional repository. A short text describes the content, historical circumstances and the characteristics of the respective series. The attached few sound examples give an acoustic idea of the edited collection. This entry is linked with the website of the Austrian Academy of Sciences Press, and thus the edition is more visible. It is evident that this kind of website does not really correspond to an institutional repository, which represents a web-based database of scholarly material of a given institution. But since 3 years, the Phonogram Archive website offers information to sounds and sites of science, where staff members introduce singular recordings pointing out their special interest and approach. Some examples are related to the historical collections already published and now accessible with additional research output. To shortly conclude, the work with the historical collections of Grammar had started conventionally as a published CD box, including a printed booklet with digitized sounds and documents on an attached CD. Dealing with historical recordings made during expeditions to, at that time, unknown regions, asked for new approaches and collaboration. In the very beginning, only a few scholars were interested in those historical sound documents. They much more concentrated on their own fieldwork. But it was also the time when fieldwork methods were discussed and archives as places of knowledge production were rethought. Slowly, the interest in archives and historical recordings was growing, and that interest opened new ways in studying historical recordings. Not only the performer-researcher-archivist relationship was discussed by Anthony Seeger and Schubert Chowdhury, but also the position of ethnomusicologists by Caroline Landau and Janet Topfarchen, stating that we are all archivists now. Euphemistically, one could characterize this edition as a red thread from analog to digital. The general conditions changed to the better. The visibility increased and topics related to the work of this edition found their interest in worldwide debates. Similar projects were started, the general interest in archival work increased, and joint activities pushed new topics. For instance, the role and the power of archives and their standing in research. New networks made the voice of archives more audible. After a time when archives were seen as dusty, old-fashioned institutions, a new interest, also driven by the digital techniques, has taken place. The CD edition might be an example of a journey through time, visible by a vital content-related concept, by digital demands, and the indispensable institutional and personal networks for sharing experiences. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerda, for this fascinating communication. Now I have time for questions. So it starts here in the... No. Okay.
Thank you, Gerda. Clarifying that. Can you explain me a little bit more the less interest in the beginning?
The what?
In the networks, you have an item that is less interest in the beginning.
The network at the beginning?
Yes.
What I said that the phonogram archive was a forerunner. That was in that case that around 1900, the idea of building a sound archive. We had the technique to keep sound on the discs or on the cylinders, and the idea to make an archive as a library, but an archive for sounds, was realized first in Vienna. But as you know, in the same year or 1 year later, it was in Paris and then in Berlin and all around the world. The archives popped up as, mushrooms, exactly. And from that time on, if you read the documents in the phonogram archive, we have close connections because the phonogram archive was asked, how did you work, which technique, and researchers, for instance, between Vienna and Berlin were asking which technology is better to take to the field. Either I should take Edison phonograph or I should take the Vienna Archiv phonograph and all these things. And out of that, later on, it was a kind of making public the archive to some extent within the archive, a small archival community, but the phonogram archive was a starting point for that. And was, as you see, for instance, with Zurich. The linguist was coming to Vienna, was looking around, wow, such an archive. We need something like that. And the archive was clever. We can sell our archive phonograph, which brings money, and we host the collection, and so everything started. And in case of Zurich, we found out that we have on both sides documents, recordings, and that was really the work to bring everything together. And there are some other examples. It was mostly in Eastern Europe where institutions were we're working with the, well, that was also for historical reasons. The Austro-Hungarian Empire shed light.
Do you think, sorry for asking this, do you think there is still interest in knowing the procedures, the recording procedures? Because we know that we take for granted that those old recordings are recordings of the sound events as they are, but now we know that the technical constraints of the equipment had problems. So do you feel that there is still interest to know those constraints in order to get better appreciations and better,
a better replay, you mean?
Not only replay, but the way we interpret those data.
That's exactly what I said. We were working together with specialists because it's impossible for one person to know all cultures around the world and the languages. And we found out that some information on the protocols was not correct from our point of view, but it's historical. And as I said, these debates are part of our comments now, specifically in very specific collections as recordings from the First World War, which were made in prison of war camps. There we have huge comments on this recording situation, on this idea, how to collect everything you can get. And you need not go far away, and you get languages and music from all over the world. So that was, as we are dealing today, we are always thinking about what's good for us, where can we get even more, and how can we present ourselves. And that never stops. And I don't think the edition mainly is thought as a starting point. It's not only that many colleagues were not interested in historical recordings when we started with this work. It's still that now this discussion is the most important. It's not the content as such, it's just the circumstances. It's really going on that. And again, you have to balance both sides, but the edition should be an incentive for all of you to deal with such recordings. But as we have heard from Miguel, even some of these historical recordings you can find on the platforms, because you are not safe in any case, and they sound different, as you said. We know our re-recording results, and we have found them on, I think, YouTube. That sounded completely different, as people like it, but that has nothing to do. So these are two worlds which exist side by side to some extent.
More questions? Well, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about this interface between the archive and these specialists that were invited to write about and to study this collection.
Yeah, I was thinking about if I should tell something about these experiences I had, but one experience was really especially nice. Well, it was my idea. I have to go to conferences, otherwise I don't know what's going on in the ethnomusicological discourse and how to deal with recordings if there's anyone who would be interested, which wasn't the case in the very beginning, and I was greeted and said, oh, poor Gerda, you always have to deal with these historical recordings you have not made by yourself and something like that. But another very nice experience was a study group meeting in Albania, which Adrian organized, and it was about multipart music, and a lot of Italian colleagues were in our group. And one, Cristina Ghirardini, asked me, do you have the recordings of Romania? I said, yes, why do you know that? Wonderful, from the catalog. And out of that short coming together, it turned out that we made together this edition with the financial help in Italy. Austria has no financial support, but Italy had given, and it was a wonderful cooperation. That is one example. And others, it's by chance. You have to be very open. And in the very beginning, I was working on the internet. I found a native speaker of Inuit people in Greenland via internet. I visited the university website in Copenhagen and found this person. I never met her personally, but we had a very intensive exchange when rewriting the protocols, because in this language it turned out that since the recordings are from 1905 and we published this publication 2005 and the writing has changed. So we give the original from the protocols and the today's writing, for instance. So 2 examples, and even
I think
some
you should
more.
write about it.
Yeah, no, not really. No, but I'm so grateful that I could get to know so many people all over the world in that, with that work that is marvelous. And it's really interesting, as we all discuss now. Everyone has another approach. Your project is such an example. It's wonderful. Everyone can, well, it's not fixed in that sense. We have ideas of what was kept in former times, but what it meant for those and what it means for us now is completely different. And it will change ever, I think. Even with the new technologies, we make other things, or we go to the artistic place and make, let's speak the things and not only document it in a very strict way. So, yeah, archives are alive and give a lot of work, I think.
So thank you, Gerda. Like one more question, okay? Just one more question.
With this situation with archives, our archives, the historical ones, being on the same environment that are Spotify, YouTube, where we can find our own resources, copies, altered into those platforms, right? Do you think that in the context that we are, which is European Union, the European Union has a directive, right, from 2019 about the digital market, right? A great deal of that directive is very focused on the capitalist part of the matter, right? So the platforms, how the platforms make money, how do the artists receive their rights, even though I have lots of research with that. It seems that the archives, the historical archives, are totally forgotten on that directive. I don't know if Austria has already implemented it or not, but Portugal is still transcribing it right now. And well, our problem here is of a bigger scope, because our own heritage laws are, in my point of view, outdated, and they do not regard sound archives in any shape or form. The little that they do, we haven't been implementing it. Even the legal project, we haven't been implementing that. We only have that law portraying sound in 1989. So quite late. And that's why, for instance, most of you are talking about historical archives that have a great...
That was the project only on the historical collections. Yes. What's going on today, Kerstin already addressed, and it's not my job anymore for the future. And I don't want to say anything because I can't be responsible, I won't be responsible, but the next generation is responsible for that. And for me, it's fascinating to see what's going on. To some extent, you could feel a little bit as long as I have been active. In which direction, and it is exactly that. I was thinking when Miguel explained our world today, and I thought, yeah, we are really in between. On the one hand, we are pushed in that direction, but we can't go in that direction for very reasons. So, yeah, I can't give any idea how to do that, but some things like the website, which is also open. I was just thinking on Rosario's website, which we saw this morning. The pity is we have started already and we have put in the net recordings, and then we are astonished that we find it somewhere again. Yeah. That's the way. We can't avoid that.
There's a degree of it that is an ethical issue, right? Because we may alter history, the recorded history.
Yeah, I know, but please. It's not very fair, I know, but it's really, I promised when I stopped working that I never will give a lecture anymore, so I did my presentation. No, because I'm not the right person anymore. No, I like the discussions, you know. I say something and maybe it's right or not, but I think that's better, this position. As long as you therefore I thought, I'm the history already. It's a bad feeling, but it is like that.
So I'd like to thank Miguel and Gerda for this wonderful session. Thank you a lot. And now lunchtime, please. So.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
It was just.
No, I think totally completely, but it's the background.